Hello and welcome to Strategic Dialogue podcast series. Today's guest is Dr. Amare and Aweke, Director General and Lead Researcher of the Middle East Affairs Research Directorate at Ethiopia's Institute of Foreign Affairs in Addis Ababa. He earned his PhD in Peace and Security Studies from Addis Ababa University in 2020, following an MA in 2012 and BA in 2007 in Political Science from Mekelle University and Addis Ababa University's IPSS. Before joining the Institute of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Aweke held various academic and administrative positions at higher education institutes between 2007 and 2020. His research addresses political dynamics, civics participation, interstate relations, and regional security. Good afternoon, Dr. Amare. Thank you so much for taking your time to have this discussion with us. So I would like to start our discussion by asking this important question, which is, what are the most significant historical and cultural factors that have linked the Horn of Africa in the Middle East over time?
Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome.
Okay, so I'll be just talking about the historical and then cultural factors that connects the Middle East with the Horn of Africa, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to go back to history to talk about the historical and then and cultural factors that actually bind together Ethiopia and then the Middle East. So we would have to start, for example, from the ancient Ethiopian history, where there was a very a strong kingdom. The Aksumite kingdom, for example, and then so this kingdom used to expand its way or territories towards the South Arabian parts of the Middle East, probably which is present-day Yemen, and then there were a kind of cultural affiliations with the Horn of, so the Middle East states. Okay. Yeah, I mean, probably it's one of the major factors might be the nation building procedure that actually started in the ancient Ethiopian kingdom or in the ancient Ethiopian state that tries to just expand its way towards probably the northwestern parts of the world, which is going to be presently probably southern parts of Arabia. So that actually was the factor that actually linked Ethiopia and then the Middle East. So we can say nation building can be also one of the factors that actually bind together these states beginning from the ancient periods. And then these days we have also some sorts of affiliation with the Gulf and some other states of the Middle East. And then the other can be also, there have been other cultural aspects which probably related to religion and beliefs and then traditions, right? Yeah. So whenever two kind of civilizations or people who live in different kind of regions or continents, so when there is a kind of an expansion in the form of nation building, so they are expected to exchange beliefs, traditions, and everything, as well as religion as well, right? So yeah. Islam, for example, and then Christianity even. So the two most important religions of the world, roots from the Middle East, and then at the same time expanded towards the rest of the world, and then Christianity and Islam specifically were also one of the cultural traditions that we have that actually binds Ethiopia with the Middle East states. So if we are supposed to actually mention or highlight some of the major culture and the historical factors that actually bind us together, there might be so many, but we can limit them into, as a political factor, for example, nation building procedure, and then the other one is also economic, because the states used to exchange trade activities and other commercial exchanges in the ancient time, in the medieval time. And then we can also mention maybe also some other historical trends, like for example the expansion of Islam towards the Horn of Africa and then the rest of Africa as well. So this can be some of the factors that we can highlight that bind together the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia specifically, and then the Middle East states. So yeah, I mean there might be so many, but these are the major factors that we can highlight.
That's actually a very good insight.
Yeah.
So, how does this links influence current regional dynamics, including emerging security blocs and proxy alignments? Also, do you observe continuity or recalibration in these relationships today?
Yeah, I mean, these days there are some sorts of alignments, and then at the same time shifting of alliances between different powers. Specifically, as we are just found in one of the dynamic region in the world, which is the Horn of Africa, and then the Red Sea region as well, where the Middle East state and at the same time the Horn of African states share together. Therefore, yeah, in order to just have to have a kind of an economic and then security cooperation. So these two regions often go back to history and then recite the type of relation they used to have once upon a time, and then they can build from history to have a very strong and then robust kind of economic and security cooperation. Like for example, we can cite some of the cooperation that we have in the Horn of Africa and then the Red Sea region, as well as that binds the Horn of Africa with the Middle East. For example, there is the Red Sea Alliance. It's a kind of an alliance of states, the coastal states of the Horn of Africa or Eastern Africa and then the Gulf region, right? Yeah. So even though the parameters that might be used in order to establish this Red Sea Alliance might be in some kind of question, because it has excluded a few states like Ethiopia and Israel, right? Anyways, we would have to just go back and then recite our history and then the different things that we used to share together in order to establish the type of economic and security arrangements in the Red Sea region or in the Horn of Africa and in the entire Middle East region. So yeah, I mean, unless and otherwise we go back and look the history and then the culture that binds us together, right? It would be very difficult to establish such a kind of whatever economic and security cooperation in the region. So the history is going to be one of the assets that we have in order to come together and then create whatever type of economic and security cooperation. So it is easy when you share history together, right? So yeah, these are the binding factors that still help the Middle East and then the Horn of Africa to be, in a kind of the same region. Sometimes we call them, unless and otherwise we talk about the Middle East, for example, it will be very difficult for us to discuss about the dynamics of the Horn of Africa, right? And then the dynamics of the Horn also affects the dynamics of the Middle East region. And then sometimes there are people who used to consider it a kind of a single region.
Yeah.
Right?
Thank you so much. That was a very good explanation.
Yeah.
You have already highlighted that Ethiopia is often cited one of the earliest Christian nations, while also hosting one of Africa's oldest Muslim communities. How has this religious and cultural duality historically shaped Ethiopia's ties with Israel, Arab states, and the broader Islamic world, not only through diplomacy, migration, and spiritual linkage, but also as a source of soft power that allowed Ethiopia to serve as a symbolic and cultural bridge between Middle East and Africa?
Okay. Yeah, it's not only in Islamic tradition, but it's also embedded in Christian tradition that Ethiopia have been considered as the earliest recipients of Christianity and both Christianity and Islam, I think. Exactly. We actually, accepted Christianity, for example, in the early days of its expansion, which is in the 4th century AD. As well as we might even say that we're the first believers of Islam, because the descendants of the first Islamic believers actually came to Ethiopia in order to escape the type of what war that is going on in the Middle East, the place where Islam has been founded, right? So they were just fighting against the first believers of Islam, and then we received them, and then we accepted their religion, and then gave them a kind of what sanctuary for them, and then we can consider that Ethiopia is the first believers of that of what Islam, even before Saudi, Mecca, or Medina actually accepted Islam, right? So we would have to go back and then look at the history of Islam in Ethiopia and then Islamic history in the Middle East region, right? So we're the first believers of both Christianity and Islam. So that actually was one of the major factors that still binds Ethiopia and then the Middle East region. It doesn't has to be Islamic state, or it doesn't necessarily has to be a Christian state. We're not going to just, for example, attach ourselves to a certain state that is Islam or that is Christian, right? We actually accept both Christianity and Islam, and then we still maintain such a kind of what relation with the Middle East state, no matter they are a Christian or no matter they are an Islamic state. So we still follow an independent as well as a neutral kind of what policy with what is going on in the Middle East, specifically with respect to religion, right? Because the Middle East has, religion has a very significant importance in the Middle East, specifically in shaping the dynamics of states, the entire politics, and then everything, right? So most of the states in the Middle East are not secular enough, so that we have to be very cautious about having a kind of what an independent and a neutral policy with respect to the Middle East states. So we will be able enough to manage our differences and then at the same time our similarities. So yeah, Ethiopia have been at the position of balancing the type of what relation that need to have with the Middle East state. No matter they are a Christian or no matter they are an Islamic state. So I think that has to be one of the major strengths that Ethiopia, has, whatever in history. We showed whatever type of what, support if needed, and then we felt whatever type of what problem going on in the Middle East as our own sometimes, because we still have a kind of what a culture and kind of what a historical relation with the Middle East state. So we've been balancing it anyway. We've been balancing it. So unless and otherwise we balance it, then we will have to have a kind of what a side or a position with a type of what alignments or shifting of alliances that is going on in the Middle East. But we still maintain a kind of what a balance sheet in what is going on in the Middle East as well.
Okay, that's a very interesting perspective. And it's vivid that in today's rapidly shifting Middle Eastern landscape, marked by deepening Israel-Iran tensions and new alignments among Gulf states, Turkey, and others, can Ethiopia adopt this legacy to build trust and foster inclusive diplomacy, or is that identity being sidelined in favor of hard geopolitical calculations?
Yeah, I mean, I have said it in the earlier discussion, I think, and then we will have to bring this idea of neutrality. We have seen a number of tensions that is going on in the Middle East for a long period of time, not only between Israel and Tehran, or Turkey and other states of the Gulf, probably the Gulf against other members of the Gulf, like, for example, the Qatar blockade once upon a time, and then Israel and the rest of the Gulf states, or the Palestinian question. So, I mean, the point is we have our own independent policy with respect to that of what the Middle East, or with regard to the Middle East, and then we often used to follow that policy for a long period of time. That policy is a kind of what neutrality from the Middle East question, and then there might be different kind of what questions that we still feel that that question might be right, but we still maintain our own official position of being neutral from what is going on in the Middle East, right? Unless and otherwise, we are be able enough to actually bring a kind of a plausible solution to the issue. So we often maintain a kind of probably sometimes even a zero policy kind of policy we often follow in the question of the Middle East. So sometimes a zero policy can be also considered as a better policy than indulging yourself into the kind of question that you might not be able enough to answer it, and then you might also drag your own state into a kind of a quagmire, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes it is better to maintain an independent position, an independent outlook, and at the same time kind of a neutral policy with regard to a question that actually often evolves in the Middle East.
That's actually good. So moving on to the next question. Egypt has long been a dominant player in Middle Eastern diplomacy and Arab world affairs, though its influence has faced challenge amid shifting regional dynamics. By contrast, Ethiopia, despite its strategic importance, often struggles for equal footing, especially in Arab-dominated platforms. Amid renewed geopolitical fault line and growing water security concerns, how can Ethiopia reposition itself diplomatically and reclaim influence?
Concerning Egypt, I think the policy that we've been following, is an equitable share on the waters from the waters of the Nile. This is all about resource conflict, and then this is a resource for almost nearly 11 states in the Horn of Africa, in the northeastern parts of Africa, sorry. Therefore, we maintain a position and then at the same time a policy that actually propagates and at the same time promotes an equitable share and a fair share from this resource. For a long period of time, I think Egypt used to have a very intransigent policy with respect to the Nile waters, and then they have their own share. And then at the time, Ethiopia didn't have a kind of a say in the 1929 and then the 1959 agreements, for example, right? That actually highlights the kind of a share that Egypt would like to get from the water resources of the Nile. So we don't actually accept this kind of agreements because these agreements were signed in the absence of Ethiopia. Therefore, it doesn't consider the interests of Ethiopia and then the rest of the riparian states of the Nile. So, therefore, we need to just find a solution which is going to be an equitable and then fair share from the resource of the Nile. And then if you even consider, for example, the electricity in Egypt or the electricity in South Sudan or the electricity in Ethiopia. So electricity, for example, an excess in Egypt. Whereas in Ethiopia, we still need nearly 70% of Ethiopian society still lives in a kind of there is a power shortage, or we can say we are just living in a kind of a darkness. Therefore, there must be a kind of a fair share of resources of the Nile, whatever type of policies that Egypt follows in the Middle East, in order to, maybe smoother Ethiopia's interest. We will have to just simply follow with still our independent kind of policy that actually promotes an equal share from the Nile waters. So we've been following it for a long period of time, for the last probably 5 years, I think, after the revamping of the Ethiopia-Egypt negotiation on the Nile waters, following the coming to the power of Prime Minister Abiy. Therefore, we've been following this kind of things, and then the African Union actually also intervened to actually negotiate the existing tension between Ethiopia and Egypt. So instead of just taking the water resources of the Nile issue to the Middle East and then the Arab League, or even the United Nations Security Council, I think it is better for Egypt to look regional solutions for our regional problems. And then we have the African Union, we have IGAD, we have the Nile partnership agreements, right?
Exactly.
That we signed once upon a time. We both signed. Egypt has also signed once upon a time. Therefore, we need to just use these platforms and then frameworks in order to actually solve, that the tension that arises from the waters of the Nile. So I don't think we can find a kind of what solution by taking it outside of the region. Like the Middle East, for example, right? They have their own interests over the waters of the Nile. Therefore, they've been, for example, supporting the position of that of what Egypt, right? But that doesn't actually upset us, or that doesn't actually force us to shift our own position and at the same time policy towards the Middle East states. We're still pursuing our own diplomatic methods to actually bring Egypt into some kind of negotiation concerning the waters of the Nile. So it is in the African Union, it is within Africa, it is within our own region, which is IGAD, and at the same time we have also the Nile Partnership Agreement, right? I forgot the name anyway. But yeah, so it's within the country that we can seek a kind of solution, but we still follow a kind of a diplomatic pursuit against that of Egypt, for what Egypt is doing in the Middle East. And then at the same time, recently, following, for example, the signing of an MOU between Ethiopia and Somaliland, there is also a growing tension between Ethiopia and Egypt, because Egypt is trying to, support whatever type of providing a kind of support to the state that has a kind of an interstate tension with that of Ethiopia, for example, Somalia. Yeah. So we actually have to be careful enough to look or to have a kind of a security oversight over the Horn of Africa, the Red Sea region, the Middle East, and then the Northeastern Africa, because there is Egypt. So I think we have to be cautious enough on those issues, and then we still maintain our own diplomatic methods, and at the same time initiatives to actually bring Egypt and then the rest of the Middle East states to have a kind of a better stand with respect to the waters of the Nile, I think. So yeah, it's as diplomacy, and then at the same time a fair share of the waters of the Nile. That's where we stand on, I think. Yeah.
That's truly a useful insight. But if regional alliance is not the option, what diplomatic alliance within or beyond the Middle East do you think Ethiopia should strengthen to balance Egypt's dominance, particularly as shifting alignments in the Middle East continue to redraw regional power maps?
As I have said earlier, we need to have a very careful oversight over the areas of the Red Sea, the Middle East, and the Northeastern Africa as well, right? Okay. There might be different kind of alliances. For example, there is an alliance that was formed against Ethiopia following the MOU, right? There is this axis, the Mogadishu, Asmara, Cairo axis. So they were just forming a kind of unhealthy alliance or grouping against Ethiopia. There is no any kind of that doesn't actually, it doesn't necessarily mean that doesn't alert us, but it actually gave us a very significant input or insight how we can possibly avoid from joining such a kind of unhealthy groupings in the future, right? So it's not working at this time, right? Because we signed, for example, the Ankara Declaration with Somalia. So I think we still believe that Somalia has to withdraw itself from the access that it formed once upon a time, right? Therefore, it is up to Ethiopia to follow whatever type of its diplomatic kind of means in order to bring other actors who are signing any kind of access or alliance with Egypt, maybe because it's going to be one of the historical access that we have in the northeastern Africa. So we're not going to just simply name it as an enemy, but we still have our own tension.
Exactly.
So in order to, manipulate whatever type of axis that is going on in the Horn of Africa against Ethiopia, so we believe that they would be also part of it. So whether we like it or not, we are one of the priorities in the Egypt's national security agenda, or in the Egypt's foreign policy agenda. So we need to just find a way, to actually discuss with these alliances, or avoid this kind of unhealthy alliances, probably because of Egypt. So we have to be careful enough to join or not to join whatever type of alliance that is taking place in the Horn of Africa. And then we have to calculate the existing alliance as well, as you said, right?
Yeah.
So whether that alliance actually includes Egypt or not, or whether we have to join it or not, we have to calculate it. So there must be a careful oversight of the security environment of the Red Sea, the Middle East, and I think that the Northeastern African region. So this is a constant kind of activity. We are doing this for our own national interest, for our own national security, I think, not for the sake of that, of protecting maybe Egypt, or maybe defending Egypt, right?
Yeah.
So this is a kind of a constant activity that we often follow for the sake of our own national interest and national security. So yeah, we have to calculate whatever type of alliance that is taking place, and then independently choose to join or not to join this kind of alliances. So yeah,
That's an interesting perspective. So both the Horn of Africa and the Middle East are critical junctions for global trade, energy routes, and maritime security.
Yeah.
But they remain destabilized by persistent conflict and foreign entanglements. So what are the global implications of this escalating instability, especially as the Israel-Iran confrontation risks border regional escalation and spillover effects?
This might be a very broad kind of topic and question, but I'll try to just highlight the one that I probably be able enough to bring whatever type of perspectives into it or from it. So the first one is, as there's an escalating tension maybe in the Middle East, probably because of the Israel-Iran tension this time. And once upon a time, the Israel-Hamas kind of conflict for the last probably 2-3 years, right? So this regional escalation might have its own significant impact over national interests of Ethiopia, the Horn of Africa, probably the entire globe, maybe, right? And then we have seen, for example, the escalation into a kind of a nuclear kind of war, right? Unless it was averted, probably because of the United States of America, and then probably because of the signing of a ceasefire agreement. A negotiated kind of ceasefire agreement between Iran and Israel, right? So we understand that this regional conflagration actually might, create a kind of a world war, right? And then this world war is going to be a kind of a nuclear war, which is going to be a very devastating kind of war that we have never experienced in the history of the globe. So, like, for example, it might result, for example, on the closure of the Hormuz, for example. If it was escalated into a kind of regional war, then it might result in the closure of Hormuz, which will create a huge pressure in the Red Sea region as well, right? Yeah. And then that pressure would have a kind of a significant traffic in the import and then export of materials to and then from Africa, all right? And then therefore the transportation of materials towards Ethiopia and then from Ethiopia to the international market might be, whenever these outlets are busy, then the timing might increase, right? Therefore, we may not be able enough to import and then export the goods and services from the international market, and then to the international market might be extended, right?
Yeah.
So the time matters in this case. And then there might be also a kind of a security issue in the Red Sea region. Iran might just support, for example, one of the proxies, which is Houthi, which is operating in the Red Sea region. Therefore, so Iran might resort in supporting this kind of extremist groups, which might launch kind of rocket barrages to the ships that might be going in the Red Sea region, right?
Yeah.
So that might have a kind of a security kind of cost to Ethiopia as well as to the international market. So we might also expect it to pay kind of a very significant transit cost, might be double from the one that we are paying now.
Yeah.
Probably because of a security guarantee that they might just ask us to pay additional security guarantees, right? And then we have also merchant ships in the international market. I think 12 merchant ships that are operating in the international market. So I think the security of these merchant ships might be also in kind of risk. This time or until now, I think the rocket barrages or the drones that might be launched from the Houthi didn't actually risk the Ethiopian ships or the ships of other states, only Israel. It's only those ships going to Israel. So they might just extend their attacks to other ships as well. That might also include ours, right?
Yeah.
So this kind of things will create escalation even in the Red Sea region, and then the entire conflict of the Middle East might also might be dragged into Africa, right?
Sure.
So Africa might be dragged in to be part of that conflict in the form of proxy or in some kind of direct kind of conflict as well. So it would have a very significant cost. And then, the signing of, for example, this negotiated ceasefire gave us a kind of a breeze at the moment, but that may not be a kind of a lasting solution. But escalation, whatever kind of regional escalation or a global escalation that is taking place in the Middle East actually would have a very significant consequence or impact in the Red Sea region, the entire globe as well as Ethiopia, right?
Yeah.
So this escalation, unless and otherwise it's stopped, then it would be also our issue.
Exactly.
It can be also our own issue, yeah.
Thank you. You have already mentioned some non-traditional security issues like the food insecurity or the maritime shipping disruptions, but how does this instability intersect with other non-traditional security issues such as forced migration, piracy and maritime insecurity, arms smuggling, and extremist flaws?
Whenever there is a kind of a stable environment, then you would be able enough to actually control at least, or manage, not control, but we can also manage the inflow and the flow of migration or cross-border criminality or whatever traditional security risks that we're talking about, right?
Exactly.
So whenever there is escalation in this region, then it might create a kind of a gap for these groups to actually operate in this very insecure environment. Therefore, the risks would be double, right? Then, illegal migrations, and then at the same time, there might be also, for example, let's say the Houthis and then other extremist groups in the Red Sea region might, capture or hold hostage some of the illegal migrants crossing maybe the Red Sea or the Indian Ocean to make it to some of the Arabian world or the Arab states like them, for example, KSA, Qatar, Lebanon, and others, right?
Exactly.
So they might just hold them hostage and at the same time ask money. And then beyond that, they might also endanger their personal security as well, right? So most of the illegal migrants, I think this is also the second, might be the second destination of Ethiopian illegal migrants, the Middle East region, right? Therefore, it's going to be also another security problem for us. Our citizens might be endangered, and at the same time, the entire flow might be also, there is a gap, and then whenever there is such a kind of what gap, then it might increase the flow of these people into this region as well.
Yeah.
But at the same time, their security might be in kind of what danger as well, right?
Yeah.
Because there is no any kind of what reliable force who is be able enough to protect the security of these people, at least, even though they are illegal migrants. So, yeah. So it might be very much double, I could say.
Okay, that was a very helpful insight. So the Horn of Africa has become a chessboard for Middle Eastern rivalries, the Gulf states and Turkey to Israel and Iran, all vying to influence through ports, military bases, also ideological alliances. So as Ethiopia lacks direct access to the sea, but remains a regional anchor state, like how could it avoid becoming collateral in this great power competitions?
This is sometimes it's very difficult to say that Ethiopia is a kind of what a landlocked country because of the near proximity to geographic proximity to the Red Sea region, but yeah, then unfortunately we don't have a kind of what a direct access to the sea.
Exactly.
And then that could be also one of the major factors that actually limit us to play a significant role in the regional security environment or in the regional security spectrum as well, as an anchor state, So, of course, still we're requesting to have a kind of a direct access to the sea. And then that question might be a kind of a legitimate question to the Ethiopian society. But the neighbors may not accept it as a positive kind of activity from their side.
Yeah.
Probably it might endanger their kind of comparative advantage they've been having for a long period of time, right? So we don't have to just simply, see that Ethiopia's comparative advantage is taken for granted, right?
Exactly.
So that there must be some kind of ways where we could gain a kind of access to the sea that could also benefit the region itself, not only Ethiopia, then the entire region. So Ethiopia can be a very significant security guarantor in the region, if we are thinking about from the regional security perspective. And then at the same time, the entire Horn of African littoral states can also benefit from the fast-growing Ethiopian economy as well, right?
Yeah.
Therefore, we're still providing a kind of foodstuffs, for example, and then water to the region, to the littoral states who have shortage of clean water or fresh water, right?
Yeah.
Not only the Horn of African state, but the Middle East as well. So, if they are be able enough to calculate it from the regional security and then the regional economic cooperation perspective, I think this is a great opportunity for the Horn of African littoral state, where they can benefit from the growing Ethiopian economy as well, right?
Yeah.
And then Ethiopia also one of the great militaries in the Horn of Africa, one of the best, in fact, and the first militaries in the Horn of Africa. So Ethiopia has the ability to provide security in this region. Therefore, if we are be able enough to think in terms of regional security perspective, and then in terms of regional economic cooperation perspective, then I think providing an access to the sea to Ethiopia would benefit the region the most than it benefits Ethiopia, I think.
Interesting. So, considering the discussion of the previous question, what role should intelligence coordination, strategic diplomacy, and economic statecraft play in maintaining balance without compromising national autonomy?
We're still following the diplomatic means to get an access to the sea. These days there are a number of innovative methods where a landlocked country can get a direct access to the sea, right? So, like for example, Italy has provided an access to the sea, a direct access to the sea, a sovereign access to the sea to Austria, which is landlocked, right? And then in our own African context, for example, Morocco recently has provided a direct access to the sea to nearly 3 or 4 sub-Saharan African states, the Sahel region, like Burkina Faso, Niger, and the like, right? Therefore, I think it's probably for the benefit of even the littoral states themselves to actually provide this kind of access to the landlocked state, because the entire economy of the landlocked state has been stagnant as a result of lack of access to the sea, right?
Yeah.
Therefore, it is better to look on the new methods of getting access to the sea through diplomatic means, through concessions, through agreements or contracts, right? Like, for example, you could build, for example, a port in the Horn of Africa for probably you can use it for a prescribed period of time, let's say 50 years or 100 years. So that you could have a kind of a sovereign access in that port, and then you can develop to that specific state, and then it's in the form of lease, for example, right?
True.
So that is one of the ways where we can have a direct access in the Horn of Africa as well. If the Horn of African states actually agree in this mechanism, so others have been using it, and then it doesn't have to be surprising when Ethiopia actually asks us to get a direct access to the sea in the form of concessions, for example, or in the form of canal building, or in the form of corridorization projects or connectivity projects, right?
Yeah.
Like, for example, there is the Lapsit corridor, for example, which assumed or planned to connect nearly 8 states in the Horn of Africa, both landlocked and the littoral states, and then nearly 12 or 13 ports in the Horn of Africa. So Ethiopia is in the center of this, right? Therefore, the Ethiopian economy can benefit from the existing connections from Port Sudan to Mombasa, I think, right? Therefore, it's the other states of the world have been using it, and then it actually also benefits the entire region, not only a few states. Right?
Yeah.
So I think it's better to look at, the innovative methods through diplomatic means, wherever concessions, you can agree with some other states, or lease, you can agree with some states, and then at the same time also maybe corridorization projects, as we have seen. Yeah. Or connectivity projects as well. So the entire region might be beneficially from the existing projects, right? So by making this kind of things, I think the question of just getting access to the sea can be, can be solved maybe in the future, right? Yeah. So yeah.
Okay, that's a very good explanation. So moving on to the last question of our discussion. As we all know, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has recently called for Ethiopia to diversify partnerships and adopt a self-directed foreign policy. Can Ethiopia realistically sustain a multi-vector approach, engaging the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, Israel, Egypt, and Iran simultaneously, amid rising tensions and realignment pressure in the Middle East? Or what might be the risks of such strategic overstretching? How can Ethiopia preserve policy coherence with safeguarding the national interests? Yeah.
How can we be able enough to benefit from the existing opportunity in the Middle East without aligning ourselves with, without aligning ourselves with a certain state, you mean, right?
Yeah.
This is something that we've been discussing earlier, I think, and then that's why I think Ethiopia still maintained a kind of very independent and the neutral policy in the Middle East with respect to affairs in the Middle East as well, right? Yeah. So that we could benefit from whatever type of rival powers. True. They are rival in the Middle East. But they can't be rival, I think, in the matters of that of Ethiopia. So these states can be considered as our strategic and at the same time technical partners or tactical partners. We don't have to just simply, for example, ally ourselves with a certain state or attach ourselves with a certain state. whenever we are be able enough to benefit from all, right? I think we have a kind of partnership with Turkey. We've been partnership with Iran, I think.
Yeah.
We've been also partners with UAE, and then we've been also partners with the KSA, with Saudi Arabia as well, right? So this states, for example, if we calculate them, so they are rival states in the Middle East.
Yeah.
If we don't give them the opportunity to become rival in Ethiopia or in the Horn of Africa, if we are be able enough to manage their differences, so we can benefit from the existing opportunity, right?
Yeah.
So UAE might have its own unique interest, and then there might be something unique that might contribute to Ethiopia's development as well.
Yeah.
KSA might have its own unique interest. We would have to manage that interest, and at the same time, KSA might have its own unique contribution that might contribute into Ethiopia's development.
Yeah.
And Turkey as well, Iran as well, Israel as well, or whatever type of state you call in the Middle East have their own specific interest, and then we will have to manage that interest. There must be a careful oversight, as we have said it earlier. But the most important thing is they have their own unique or distinct characteristics they could contribute to our own economy or our own investment opportunities or trade or whatever that we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So we have to just, exploit their differences and then, detach ourselves from aligning with a certain state, or UAE, KSA, or Turkey, or Iran. Instead, it's better to, I think, benefit from the existing opportunities or from the unique features that they could contribute into our own development. So we have to be cautious enough in calculating this kind of rivalry, not to indulge ourselves into their own affairs, or not to become a kind of a proxy state into their conflicts and something like that. So a cautious oversight might be needed, but all of them can be, all of them can contribute something into our own development. So we have to know how we can possibly maximize our benefit from the existing rivalry.
Okay, but what if the re-emerging tension between Ethiopia and Eritrea, particularly along the volatile border zones, escalates, and what role could Middle Eastern power play, whether as stabilizers, spoilers, or silent stakeholders if conflict escalates?
Yeah, I mean, we have to expect both, I think, sometimes, because they are rival. And then most of them would like to, for example, be a champion of, mediator between Ethiopian and the Eritrean, whatever type of conflict or tension that we have currently. Therefore, they might just exploit whatever type of difference that we have. And then sometimes they might exacerbate the existing kind of tension. So we need to be careful. But one of the factors that actually brought the Middle East states into Africa is also as they came as a conflict mediator, for example, right? So once upon a time, Qatar tried it. One of the trailblazers of mediators of conflict in the Horn of Africa. They tried, for example, in 2008, I think, to mediate the existing conflict between the government forces and then the rebel groups in Sudan in 2011 or 12, I think. I might forget the years, but they also deployed a kind of a peacekeeping force in Djibouti in order to mediate the existing conflict between Djibouti and Eritrea over the Dumera Mountains, I think. Tried in Somaliland and Somalia. And then the others, for example, some of them were successful in bringing, for example, the conflicting parties, for example, between Ethiopia and Eritrea, right? Like the KSA, they played a very significant role, for example, bringing together these parties, the UAE as well. Yeah, I mean, they came as a conflict mediators, and then they were successful in some cases, but there is also, we have to also highlight one of the worst cases, like, for example, in Sudan, all right? There are so many actors the Middle East actors. And we're just playing, one is supporting the other, and then their rivalry has been in Sudan, for example, the KSA and then the UAE, one supporting against the other parties. So they exacerbate the existing conflict, right?
Yeah.
So unless and otherwise, you are cautious enough in areas where this status can be helpful enough in whatever mediating conflicts or participating or in investment opportunities or whatever, right? So we have to be cautious enough, and then we have to make sure that this doesn't actually include our own internal affairs. So they can be a mediator, I think, in the Ethiopia-Eritrean tension this time, like they did once upon a time. But they might also exacerbate the existing tension between Ethiopia and the Eritrea as well, right? Yeah. So they can play both, but the choice is, I think, for them, which one of the avenues they are going to just take. But we have to be cautious enough in looking at the actors who came as mediators of tension between Ethiopia and Eritrea. So it is up to us to calculate and then at the same time do the cost-benefit analysis, right? Yeah. Then eventually we might be successful enough, for example, they might be successful enough in mediating the existing tension between Ethiopia and Eritrea, or they might worsen it. So I think at this moment they can be both. But the point is we have to be careful and then in choosing whatever type of actors they can that is coming as a mediator between Ethiopia and the Eritrean tension. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amare. It was a very insightful discussion.
Thank you.